Is culture and ethnic differences, and my name is Allie, in case you didn't know. So, what is culture? It's what we're going to start with on this slide. So, culture is the behaviors and belief systems that members of a long-standing social group share and pass along to successive generations. This really influences perspectives and the values that a person might have and refers to behaviors and beliefs widely shared over a large geographic area. So an ethnic group now is people that with common historical roots, values, and behaviors who share interdependence. And I think that sense of like it's the history behind it is where the ethnicity comes in. And interdependence is just the sense that the lives are like intertwined and they come from the same roots, which makes sense. So now a racial group is based on physical differences, which come into play with like genetics. So now we are going to go culture. This is kind of continued from all of that. Culture is ever changing. It can incorporate new ideas, innovations, and ways of thinking, considerable variation in attitudes and behaviors within cultures. I think the next thing is to be aware of is acculturation, gradual process of adopting the values and customs of new culture. This often happens through immigration, and the best way, so you need to get a sense of like who your students are. So the best way to do this is what have they participated in and what do they continue to participate in. So that was just like a basic, like, this is what we need to know, background knowledge for what we're going to be doing. So our first thing is navigating different cultures at school and at home, and it's like the cultural competence. And I put those hands there because they're all kind of different, reaching up. They're all kind of going towards the same goal. So we are going to start out. So what happens when that student enters the classroom? Culture shock. Culture shock is a very extreme thing. It can be. So it's confusions about the behaviors expected of them in this new setting that they have entered into. We can also go into like cultural mismatch, which is a situation in which a student's culture at home and culture at school hold conflicting expectations for a behavior. This can definitely be seen within a lot of places at the school. We'll kind of get into that in a second. So they're going to gain experience at school. The longer they're there, the more aware they're going to become of how they need to be behaving in order to be part of this class. They can be resistant, and this is where that cultural mismatch comes in. So resisting adaptation due to strong beliefs, so reasonable accommodations come in. And where I say that kind of goes back to the cultural mismatch is like if you have a little boy whose household at home, they don't respect women at all, and like he has more authority than his mother, and he comes into the school, that could be hard because you're now in charge of that student. So now for him to become in charge of you would not be an example of a reasonable accommodation. That would be crazy if you're a female. If you're a male, that could be a whole different thing. I don't know of any cultures per se where the women are like strong ruling over the men. It tends to be more the other way around, but you never know. So that is that part. We've got some other resources here, and I am very excited. We just need to exit down. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to watch this video about immigrants and the culture shock.
I have been going to school here. I'm Canadian, but I'm not Canadian, right? So psychologically, it's a constant conversation that you're having with yourself and with those around you in how you fully are part of this society and how the loyalty, right? That sense of where you come from never leaves you.
Start a new life. Like for me, I starting a new life from back my country and came here, starting a new life and do what you want.
Well, when I first came here, there are some kids they automatically assume that I know really good English, and because I'm from Asia, they expect I'm really good at science or math. So they kept on asking me things like that, even though I was not really that good.
Have a lot of confidence.
So that right there was a big point of stereotypes, which is going to come in later.
And come here, and I know you can do it. Like, you can speak English, don't be shy.
Like a better quality of life here than back in Mexico, and it was getting pretty dangerous there.
Bridge program prepares students for life in Canada, helps them to get ready for just situations they're going to face in Canada. We give them work skills, language skills, and just help them to integrate into the culture, as well as helping them develop community awareness and programs that are available to them in their community.
Here in Canada, people focus more on other fields as well, for example, extracurricular. So at first, we really had a huge argument about whether I should join like sports team and things like that. And later on, my mom just adapted into the Canadian culture and said that's fine for me.
Sometimes on the parental side, it can be important for parents to recognize that their children are having different cultural experiences from them when they go to school and they're immersed in the mainstream or dominant Canadian culture. They may be exposed to that to a greater extent than parents, and they may be having quite different cultural experiences than the parents are.
The best thing to like get your chance to do what you want, that you cannot have in Pakistan or Afghanistan. You don't have.
They told me it's Canada's like wonderful and it's cool and it's better than Syria and Baghdad.
First of all, is don't be shy. You just need to express yourself any way you need. Like express yourself as much as you can, however you can. So in that way, you get friends faster, and not only friends, but people get to know you better and don't judge you.
Awesome. Okay, so that's fantastic. We're going to go back to Keynote here. So while that might have been in Canada, I think it's still extremely relevant to what we're doing today and here. So this is also another little like diagram of the culture shock. So they start out, it's kind of happy and sad because they're leaving home, and then they arrive. This one is in Australia, so they're confused and they're tired and they're pretty happy, they're excited. Then this culture shock happens. They feel lonely, they're missing family, they miss their food, the study is different, culture is different, it's crazy. Then they're going to come down to this low. Like, why did I come here? Will I achieve this? Now, if you've got little kids, they're going to be like, why the heck did my mom and dad do this to me? Like, it's going to be rough. It's difficult for that. So then they're going to start to adjust. And that comes in with a very safe, happy place for them to adjust. You have to provide a place for them to adjust, or else they're not going to. They're going to become confident. They're going to study better. They're going to start to make friends. And then it's going to get better up here. And that's what our main goal is. So next we're going to go into cultural competence, which is the same. We're still back at that navigating different cultures at home and school. So cultural competence, we need to be aware of our own identities. Okay. We want to be aware of our own views and aware of how we can help these kids. And we're going to want to have the ability to learn about the students' cultures, and we want to build on that. We don't want to just like clean slate. You're never going to have a clean slate. And we want to avoid stereotypes, which is going to come later on in the presentation, like more in depth. So we want to go into language and dialect right now. So we've got this little graph here. So language terminology on one side and the explanation on the other. So standard English is a form of English generally accepted at school. So this is where you see in your textbooks, in your grammar classes and all that kind of stuff, magazines, not necessarily text messages unless you have like teacher friends who text in proper grammar. Oh, okay, so then we have dialect, which is a form of language. This is like a definition. So a form of language that has certain unique pronunciations, idioms, grammatical structures that is characteristic of a particular region or ethnic group. And then we go into that code switching, which is deliberately switching from using one language to another language. So A lot of the international students here would need to do that, where they go from speaking one language to a language that they know with their friends. Then we have African American English, which when I read this at first, I was like, excuse me, what? But it actually is pretty interesting. So a dialect of some African American communities that includes some pronunciations, idioms, and grammatical constructions different from those of standard English. This is important to know because, like, you could have kids in your classroom who speak this African American English. So we are going to watch a short video about African American English.
Make sure the mic is on. African American Vernacular English, also known as Ebonics or just Black English. But in this video, I'm just going to refer to it as AVE, because African American Vernacular English takes too long to say. AVE is a variety of language spoken predominantly by the Black community in the United States. It has a number of features that are distinct from General American English, which is the variety that I'm speaking now. AVE has its own sounds, its own vocabulary, and its own grammar. No one is really sure about the origins of AVE. The most accepted theory claims that when slaves were brought over from different regions in Africa, they developed their own regional pidgin languages in order to communicate with slavers and each other using English as a base. Within a generation, these pidgins developed into more complex languages called creoles, and these creoles in different areas started to blend together into one variety. Over the next 200 years, being surrounded by a majority English-speaking community, this creole became more and more similar to English, a process called decreolization, until we get to its modern form today. So given this information, it's pretty clear that AVE is not just broken English. It has its own history as a distinct and separate language variety that just happened to become more and more like General American English over time. Usually the way you can tell if something is broken English or not is that there's no consistency in their grammar. And this is something you would see in people learning English as a second language. But AVE has been shown to have its own logical, consistent grammatical rules, and that's how we know that it's not just broken English. For example, AVE lacks a copular verb. In General American English, this would be is, so he is a student. But in AVE, you would just say he a student. This kind of feature is actually super common in languages around the world. It happens in Irish Gaelic, it happens in Russian, and it happens in Japanese. But it is also a common error in learners of English. So because it's also a common error, people tend to think that it must be broken or uneducated, without realizing that it's a perfectly valid grammatical rule, and most importantly, that it's consistent in AVE. I should also note that not all Black people speak AVE, and not all AVE speakers are Black. It's a result of our environment. We learn whatever languages are spoken around us. So a white person raised in an AVE-speaking environment will speak AVE natively, whereas a Black person who has no exposure to AVE will not speak AVE. And most AVE speakers actually speak General American English natively as well, making them effectively bilingual. Each region has its own small variations, and it even can vary from person to person. Some people might use the vocabulary of AVE without the grammar, or they might use some aspects of the grammar and just fill in the rest with General American English. People are aware of how they speak, and this is the question that tends to get asked a lot. If people are aware that they're speaking it, and they know that there's a negative connotation surrounding it, why do they keep speaking it? Because your language is your identity. You use language to show the world who you are. AVE is a part of a person's identity, and even though it's not always accepted, it's still as complex and valuable as any other variety of English. I hope this video has given you a better understanding of African American vernacular.
Okay, my computer got hot. The fan turned on, so thanks, Ben, for that explanation. Alright, so we're going to go back into play mode. Okay, so that was a really great explanation, I think. So there's other parts, though, to communication that we need to be aware of when it comes to culture. Oh, please don't do that. Okay, so the talkativeness. So talkativeness here in the Western cultures, we are chatty. We do small talk. We, some cultures are assertive with a lot of energy, but for some, this is really disrespectful. And for some cultures, silence is the golden ticket. So we want to be really sensitive to this, and we want to understand where and why our students are doing what they're doing. Eye contact. This to me was crazy when I read it, and I was like, oh my gosh. But eye contact for many cultures like Native Americans, African Americans, Mexican Americans, Puerto Ricans, and Polynesians, eye contact with an adult is extremely disrespectful, and it's challenging their authority. So we want to make sure that we're not doing that, or not that we're not doing that, not that we're not offending those students, we're not forcing them to do something they're not comfortable with. so it can be disrespectful. Personal space. So personal space is personally or culturally preferred distance between two people during social interaction, and this can be really different among different cultures, so we just want to be kind of aware of who our students are and how they're feeling, and so that we can make sure that they are comfortable. Responding to questions, and this was kind of crazy. So there's this thing called the IRE cycle. Normally it goes with adult question, child response, and then the adult evaluation. Now, this can be really weird to a lot of students because, sorry, let me just skip this back. Because a lot of students, like, this is not the way they learn until they come to American schools. So we just kind of want to be aware of this, and we want to make sure that we keep them comfortable. So kind of, that's how schooling works. So we want to make sure that they're adjusting to it, but we don't want to overwhelm them with it, if that makes sense. Personal questions. A lot of students are taught not to answer personal questions about where you live, what your phone number is, all that kind of stuff, because it can be dangerous, and that's pretty true. Wait time, which is the length that a teacher pauses. Increasing this is actually shown to be really beneficial, so we want to give our students plenty of time to think about it. There's always that one kid that immediately knows the answer and raises their hand. Ask them to hold on a second. Give those students who might need a little extra time just to get those diverse thinking and that lots of different opinions going on. We're gonna skip this video because we don't have time for it right now. So we're gonna continue this. So public versus private performance. Classrooms tend to be very public learning environments, and this can be really stressful for a lot of students because they don't know what's going on yet. They haven't mastered that, and for a lot of cultures, you don't perform something until you master that skill. So we want to be aware and allow those students to work in small groups. So we also want to mention helping out others, because a lot of the time, American culture, we go on individual success, but for a lot of students, their home life, you do not do that. You go with group success. So they might get confused when they get in trouble for sharing answers, and that can be stressful. So they value that group over individual. Family relationships and expectations is also another part of that of this topic of communication. So a lot of people will, a lot of cultures go to great lengths for their elders. So they might leave school when help is needed at home, and we just need to be aware of that and give them chances to make up their work or excuse them from an assignment here and there. Not giving them an excuse, but just kind of adapting to what they need. Their values might be put on something other than school, which is quite common for a lot of other cultures who don't value school as much as other things, like their social behavior and behaving in certain ways, which is social behavior, but we want to make sure that we are helping them put a value on school, but not overstepping those bounds of culture. Early pregnancy can also be something that's put on value, whether it could be before graduation, and so we want to make sure that we're not shaming anyone for getting pregnant, for example. So conceptions of time is another part of communication and dialect and differences, because that conception of time, they're not always on the clock, so they could be late for school, and we want to make sure that we kind of help teach them that they need to be on time for things and that this is the way that our culture works here, but we want to be understanding that this might just not be the way that they're taught. They could also be less worried about the future and more worried about the past, but that's fine. There's nothing that we necessarily have to do. We can let them know their options and kind of that kind of stuff. If you're an older education teacher, you don't necessarily have to teach a first grader about going to college, but we want to help them learn how to function in our society here. There's also worldview, general, culturally based set of assumptions about reality that influence understandings of a wide variety of phenomena. So basically this could mean there's a hurricane and some students are like, nope, it just happened because wind. And then some of those other cultures might be like, nope, supernatural gods were mad, so they caused a hurricane. We want to be understanding of this and maybe be like, well, this is how this happens in the natural world, but why this happens could be any of your beliefs, kind of thing. So the last topic we're going to talk about is creating a culturally inclusive classroom. So what should the teacher do? You want to be aware of what you got going on in yourself. So like, understand that you have bias. Just be aware of it. You want to be sensitive to culture shock, and you want to incorporate many perspectives and traditions into your lesson plans. Multicultural education is the instruction that integrates the perspectives and experiences of numerous cultural groups throughout the curriculum. There's also, we want to make sure that we work in authors of different ethnic groups. Throw in some community experiences and relate it to what they know. Draw in religious understandings into that, social studies, history, major events for other cultures. Like, we were taught in school about Thanksgiving that it was one happy thing, and it wasn't. So let's make sure that we're not teaching what's not true, and we're including everyone. Music, you can even go from different cultures have different music, so throw in different things and bring other people into it. Why is that slow? That was weird. Okay, so continued. We want to build on students' strengths, not bring down their strengths. We want to use culturally responsive teaching, which is the use of instructional strategies that build on students' existing knowledge. Sorry, I was rubbing my eye. Existing knowledge and skills that accommodate their accustomed ways of behaving and learning. We want to break down stereotypes. That's the big thing. We want to break down those stereotypes, which is also going to come in a little bit later. But what is a stereotype? Rigid, simplistic, and erroneous views of a particular group of people. We want to bring cultural diversity into culturally homogeneous classrooms. That can be for a lot of different things too. So like, if you have a predominantly African American classroom, bring in other cultures into that. It doesn't just have to be like a predominantly white classroom and you bring in other cultures. We want to foster democratic ideals and empower the students. Not democratic as in the political party. We want to, like, the fact that everybody has a voice. So now we're going to really hit that stereotype. So we want to adjust these. Bring in curriculum that represents all cultures and ethnic groups. Assign literature with diverse characters that allow everybody to be, like, strong, and that we want those, like, other people of other cultures to be strong, realistic characters. We want to explore the nature and complexity of various dialects. We want to conduct class discussions about prejudice and racism that they see, and literature that they see in everyday life, and we want to make sure that we are being aware of that and helping them through that. We want to expose students to successful role models from various ethnic backgrounds. Show them who their role models could be, not just these crazy people in the media. Small group projects with diverse groups. So get those groups mixed up with lots of backgrounds so that they can learn as much as possible. And we want to emphasize the possibility to identify with more than one cultural group. So that is all I've got. I hope you learned a lot. Thank you.